Well, folks, I had a whole video planned on a totally different subject, but many of you wanted to know what I thought about this video in particular.
Shiloh Hendricks! Shiloh Hendricks! Shiloh Hendricks!
Now, that was organized by a group called the Toronto Fitness Club, and they're very active on Telegram. A quote from Telegram is, "The mass importation of foreign blood and foreign culture has diluted our nation." Now, before I get into my analysis, I must say I was a bit unnerved and a bit rattled by this. This is not far from where I live personally. And so it got me thinking a little bit more about some of the policies and the policy options that I cover on my podcast. There are real world implications. But before I get to my analysis, folks, my name is Christopher Balkaran. I host the Open Minds podcast, where I explore the biggest topics in our discourse today with genuine curiosity. So if you're liking my content, hit that like button, subscribe, tell everyone you know. So it's no secret that Canada had really high immigration targets under Justin Trudeau. We're talking hundreds of thousands more entering into the country on an annual basis. Now, I think most Canadians see the need for immigration in our country. But the reality is many immigrants were coming in with lower skills. This was not economic immigration in the traditional sense. My parents came here as economic immigrants, but more and more temporary foreign workers were coming, international students were coming, again, with very low to no skill. And this by itself would cause a lot of resentment, a lot of animosity and anger from Canadians, some Canadians who feel like, their jobs are being stolen. Why are these immigrants coming in with low to no skill? What's happening here? These are not economic immigrants adding to the economy. These are actual concerns that many Canadians have had. And I think when we embrace temporary foreign workers and international students to the level in which we have as a nation, naturally, unfortunately, we get these splinter extremist movements that sprout up in direct opposition to those policies. But of course, what these groups are missing is an actual discourse on the challenges that Canada faces as a nation when it comes to immigration and the future of our country. I've documented this before, but our birth rate in Canada is very low. And in fact, it's been declining since the 1970s or 80s. It's been in steady decline, which is not unlike other G7 nations. But I believe Canada's is actually around like 1.4, which is a real concern because that's with immigration policies of the 1980s and 90s and early 2000s. So I don't have the stats to back this up, but I imagine even first generation and second generation immigrants may not be having kids in the same number that previous generations did. And naturally, a low birth rate poses a major problem for any country. Now, I know this is really hard to conceptualize, and it was hard for me too to conceptualize, but a low birth rate eventually means that there will be a population collapse of sorts, that there will be less people for the amount of, the replacement rate won't be there. Despite economic growth will slow, etc. And so really the only way, it's hard to tell people to have more kids or to have kids. Japan has tried different incentivization programs with limited success. So an easier quote unquote fix is immigration. Just let more people in. Back in 2022, our immigration minister, Sean Fraser, said, Canada needs more people. Canadians understand the need to continue to grow our population. So a low birth rate is one of the many reasons that Canada has embraced, specifically under Trudeau, higher immigration numbers. So that's one thing these groups miss. What's to be done about the low birth rate? And that's the Pandora's box about this. We can't not talk about that if we want to talk immigration. But the second thing to this is, I think the reason these groups really do grow in numbers is because of the clustering effect of higher immigration. Now, what do I mean by that? Well, with more immigrants coming in from very specific regions of the world, South Asia, China, etc., there's a clustering effect. immigrants from these places will most likely settle in areas with higher numbers of, South Asian, Chinese populations. And this clustering that happens means that local economies are completed almost very, very much overnight. Entire businesses, housing, etc., is all geared towards one culture, one dominant culture in a region. And, Canadians who don't live in these ethnic enclaves or who have not seen the change in these ethnic enclaves may be very open to immigration, but those who have lived in the ethnic enclave and have seen their communities change, perhaps in their minds, not for the better, start harboring real resentment. And I don't know if this is always like a race thing. I think it's more so just people seeing other people from a foreign land coming in and just occupying so many more aspects of their day-to-day life that they feel threatened. I don't know if that's the right word, but I'm certain in other countries and other places around the world, this same issue has been felt. It's nothing new to Toronto, nothing new to Canada. So the clustering happens, right? The Canadian government didn't think that, perhaps they didn't plan that this would happen to the numbers in which they are, but you look at places like Brampton, Windsor, Scarborough, Surrey. I mean, there's a large clustering of specific immigrants from specific regions that are there. And another thing that I don't think the government really planned for or anticipated was the number of temporary foreign workers. I've mentioned this on previous videos. The number of temporary foreign workers has increased dramatically. And in my opinion, I don't see employers turning away from a cheap form of labor, which is what the temporary foreign worker program is. The approvals have gone up for specific industries. Before, temporary foreign workers would come to Canada, occupy specific industries like healthcare or construction, and then over a time period either apply for permanent residency and citizenship, or go back or have made enough money to go back to their country and reapply to another country. That's typically how it worked. But today, what we see is that temporary foreign workers occupy so many other sectors than ever before. There's higher numbers than ever before, and most are not leaving, quote unquote, leaving in like a short order. Many are staying for many years in Canada. So this lends itself to, again, a lot of resentment I could see festering from specific groups in Canada. So you combine all these things, low birth rate, clustering, and temporary foreign workers increase, and you kind of start seeing how the policies have not kept up to match the immigration numbers, right? So like the immigration numbers are what they are, but the other things associated with that, again, making sure immigrants go to other parts of the country, other communities, the clustering, I just want to get back to that. Did you know that there's like limited social mobility when there's clustering? I did not know that. Limited integration with people from other cultures, a sense of being disconnected from broader society. And also, I haven't even talked about this, but like the clustering of international students, packing into rooming houses, changing entire neighborhoods because they've changed like a typical 2,000 square foot, house, single detached house into a rooming house for international students, that upends entire neighborhoods. So this is the part where, again, I think, extremist groups, they miss this completely. They don't want to talk about the birth rate. They don't want to talk about, the other supports that are needed. They don't talk about the clustering impacts and other things that immigrants are coming to Canada with. They're fixating on some of the more negative things, displaced workers and the changing of entire areas by other cultures coming in, but they don't talk about what Canada can do moving forward. It's not like, in the sign it says mass deportations now. It's like, okay, so then what happens to Canada? What happens to the economy? And, that's the quagmire. But extremist groups may not be interested in the quagmire. They may be more interested in just getting their opinion across in as much shock as possible. So while this is very unsettling to see, I do think, sadly, groups like these will continue to have their voices known because there's a lot of resentment towards previous immigration policies. But I think the pivot needs to be an open and honest conversation about Canada's declining birth rate and the way forward. What is the way forward? It can't be mass immigration on a large scale because that can lead to clustering, that can lead to, a lot of issues. So then what is the solution? Maybe it's a refining of our immigration policies back to economic immigration and boosting those numbers higher. Maybe there's incentivization programs for Canadians to have kids. I don't know, but I know that this extremist group cannot be, their policy ideas don't make sense. And I think it's because we're not talking deeper about immigration. This one was a bit difficult for me, folks. I'm not going to lie. So I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this sparked some dialogue inside you. As always, I'll leave links below. Hit me up any way you can, subscribe, share, tell all your friends. I'd be interested to know what you think as well. Leave comments below. These are not easy topics, folks, and I fully understand that. But with that said, I hope you have a wonderful day, and I'll catch you in the next one. Take care, everyone.